There is so much elation that one feels when they have been cast in a role in an opera or a musical. And I totally get it. I love it. But then the reality sets in, and you realize that all of a sudden you have to learn this role. And there is a lot to learning and preparing a role that has to go into it before you go to the very first rehearsal. And so I'm going to share one of those things with you, one aspect of that preparation process that will be so important for you to have done before you get to that first rehearsal. And that is in-depth character research. And so character research is something that, you may have sources that you can go that can come up to the answers with all of the questions that I'm about to ask you in a few moments. Because if it's in an opera, it may have extensive source material. I mean, if you're singing a role in Verdi's Otello, you have the Shakespeare play to read, and that can actually help you figure out everything that you need to know about your character. But if you are performing in contemporary musical theater where there isn't any source material besides in the creative imagination of the composer and the librettist and what you may find in the script in terms of character descriptions and stage directions, then some of these answers you're going to have to come up with yourself. And then you take these things into the rehearsal, and then your directors can guide you as to whether or not they want you to go in that direction. But what is important is that you come up with all of this research, however it is that you get to it, by reading source material or coming up with it on your own. You come up with all of this before the first rehearsal. So I'm just going to give you some of the questions that you should be prepared to answer, okay? And this is by no means an extensive list. This is just a very good start on a great deal of in-depth questions that can help you really get to the heart of your character. So the first thing that you want to ask yourself is, describe the social station of your character. Okay? What is their class? What is their family life like? What are their jobs? What do they do? Are they aristocracy or are they poor? Are they starving artists? Are they teachers? Whatever it is, you want to find out what that social station is of that character. And then using that idea, then that is going to inform several other aspects of your character, like what your character wears and how your character moves around the world. And we're going to have more questions like that later. Then what you want to do is you want to describe the emotional journey of your character throughout the show, the opera or the musical, okay? So where does the character begin emotionally before the show starts? And where does the character end, okay? You don't have to write a synopsis here of what happens in the show. But what you need to do is you need to figure out sort of where they're starting and where they're ending. And then maybe a couple of key moments of how they get from A to B. All right? So describe the emotional journey of the character from the beginning of the show to the end of the show. Okay? Then ask yourself these questions. What does your character want in the show? Every character wants something. This might not be terribly obvious, but every character wants something. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a physical thing. Okay, Albrecht wants the ring in Wagner's Ring Cycle. Okay, that's a thing. But he also wants the power that the ring has. All right, so that is a completely different thing. and understanding that difference is key. How does he or she get what they want if they get what they want? If they don't get what they want, why don't they get what they want? All right? So this question is all about want. All right? What does your character want in the opera or the musical? Do they get it? Don't they get it? How do they get it? All right? Then here's one you might not actually be able to find any source material on. This might be a totally creative question, but describe your character's childhood. Okay? How was your character as a child? Were they a happy child? Were they a sad child? Were they outgoing? Were they shy? What was their family like? Did they have good relationships with both parents? Did they know both of their parents? Did they never meet any of their parents? Did they grow up with somebody else? Were they the ward of someone? And how did that affect their childhood? And even if you can take it a little farther, of coming up with little scenes from that character's childhood, that like if this were a movie and they were doing a flashback, what would a flashback be that would inform who the character is today? So you got to be really creative for that question, all right? What happens to your character just before the show begins? Okay, so we talked about the emotional journey of the character, where the character begins emotionally at the beginning, where they end at the end. But what this question is addressing is, why does the character begin emotionally where they began? Because this thing happened to them. Okay? So that's what this is. Specifically, what happens to your character, or what is your character doing before the opera begins? Okay? And then, same thing, what is your character doing when the musical ends? Okay? You know, if it's Billy Bigelow, then the character's dead. All right? But, you know, the character may live on. And if they live on, what is it that they do? Okay? So that's important. Then this is a very important one, and this requires you to read the script, all of the lyrics in the songs, or the entire libretto of the opera. And that is that you need to figure out how do the other characters in the opera describe your character. Okay? That's very important, because the thing is that the perception of your character is going to inform you as to how it is that you present that character. All right? Does your character consciously know how others think about you? Or is your character completely in the dark about how others think about you? All right? And how does that affect your character? All right? So, reading how everybody else describes you can give you some really great details about who you are. Now, those other people can describe you and be completely wrong about your character. But something about you makes them think that. And so that has to be present. Does your character have any distinguishing physical characteristics? Okay? Do they walk with a limp? Do they have a broken arm like in Dear Evan Hansen? Do they have a hunchback like in Rigoletto? All right? Any distinguishing characteristics? And then, what does your character wear throughout the show? All right? So, and what your character wears is often going to inform you as to how your character walks, how your character gestures, how your character sits, how your character stands. So the costume is going to really help develop your idea of the character. Now, of course, you could, be in a Mozart opera thinking that you're going to be in full 18th century garb, and they've set the opera in 1960. Okay, so that makes it a little different. But if you have an idea about that as to the way it was written before you know anything about what the production is going to be like, then it can help inform you as to what it is that your character needs to bring physically to the entire role. And then finally, the last question that I'm going to have you explore is, what does the music throughout the show tell you about your character? Okay? And when I say this, I'm talking about the vocal writing. So, are you a character that always sings long lines, or are you a character that always sings lots of patter? Okay? Are you a character that sings lots of high notes, or are you a character that sings lots of low notes? Or what about the orchestration? When your character is singing or is being referenced, do we hear lots of low brass in the orchestra, or do we hear high violins? Or do we hear a rock beat, or do we hear a folk beat? Whatever it is, I want you to listen to the score, not only to when you are singing or are on stage, but also when other characters are talking about you or when you are being referenced somehow in the story. Because what that does is that tells you what the composer thinks about your character. And that can help you develop your character. Okay? So these are just a handful of questions that you should be able to ask yourself and answer thoroughly when you are doing in-depth character research in the preparation for taking your role to the very first rehearsal. And there is a ton more that you need to do in order to get ready for that first rehearsal, and even through the rehearsal process. And that's why I created a course called Robust Role Preparation. Okay? And what Robust Role Preparation is all about is it's a series of lessons that takes you from beginning to end of learning a role, so that it's from the moment that you get that notice that says that you've got the role to you getting the script or buying the score or getting that first recording of the rehearsal tracks, all the way through actually learning the music and memorizing the script, and then into the rehearsals for that show. I give you all the steps that will help make the process easy, efficient, and give you the tools to have something to say and offer to the production, which will only impress your director and make your director feel like, yes, they've got something magical to work with. So if you are interested in enrolling in that course, there is a link to it on the website right below this video. Click on that link, enroll in the course, and get started. And I promise you won't regret it.